If you own oil and gas, minerals, and royalties, chances are that you've received contact from someone in the past offering to buy them. Mineral buyers are absolutely everywhere, and not all of them have your best interest at heart. In part one of our series on the types of mineral buyers and who to avoid, we're going to talk about the history of mineral buying, a few important legal concepts that every mineral owner should know, and finally, we're going to talk about something that I like to call the knowledge arbitrage. So stay tuned and learn something. Howdy folks, my name is Stephen Hatcher and I created The Minerals Guy to provide tailored content and resources to owners of oil and gas, minerals, and royalties with the goal of educating and empowering them to understand more about minerals as an asset class and the potential value of their mineral rights. In part one of our series talking about the types of mineral buyers and who to avoid, we're going to talk about the history of mineral buying because it provides some excellent context on how to deal with mineral buyers today. If you're enjoying our content, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. This is incredibly helpful to us and allows us to get this content out to more folks. So let's jump in. Now, purchases and sales of minerals, of royalties, have been around since the birth of the oil and gas industry. And I've actually seen mineral deeds, royalty deeds, dating back to the 1920s, the 1930s, and the 1940s. Back when the oil and gas industry was really a nascent industry, right? It was new, it was growing, new field discoveries were being made all over the place. And now this is when legal concepts of ownership of mineral rights first began to be applied to oil and gas. So in states like Texas and Louisiana and Wyoming and Colorado and Oklahoma and all of these states where oil and gas production began to take off, right? Bodies of law began to be developed in these states to define the rights of the mineral owner, the rights of the surface owners, and the rights of oil and gas lessees. Now, there's a couple of really important concepts that were created during this era that I think are important to discuss. And first is the concept that fee ownership of a piece of property includes with it the right to explore for and produce oil and gas that's located below the surface of the earth. So when you think about fee ownership of property, the way I was taught is that it's a bundle of sticks, right? And the rights to the minerals, the rights to the oil and gas was one stick included in that bundle of sticks. Now, another concept that's important to consider is the concept that the mineral estate could be severed from the surface estate, whether through a deed or by a reservation in a deed or even by a will. So the idea that the minerals estate and the surface estate could be separated. And finally, the last concept that I think is important to discuss is the concept that the mineral estate is dominant to the surface estate, right? For the purposes of exploring for and producing oil and gas reserves, right? The mineral owner has the right to use a reasonable amount of the surface in order to exploit those minerals. So back during this era, when these legal concepts were being created, right? While these mineral transactions were happening, the market was small and it was illiquid. And when I refer to the concept of liquidity, what I mean is the ease with which a seller can bring a certain item to market and find a willing buyer. But in general, the market was not large. There was not a competitive landscape in which mineral owners could easily bring their minerals to market. The asset class just wasn't well understood, and there wasn't a ton of capital out there chasing minerals. Who were the mineral buyers back during this era? So most mineral buyers were individuals, mostly oil and gas professionals such as landmen or geologists, and in some limited cases, the oil and gas companies themselves, right? But for the most part, right, these individuals who were purchasing mineral rights, right, they weren't a part of large, sophisticated, well-capitalized organizations, right? These were individuals doing one deal at a time. So who were the mineral sellers, right? So the mineral sellers were ranchers, farmers, They were folks that lived in rural areas where these oil and gas field discoveries were being made. And you have to consider the era. The internet did not exist, right? Folks didn't have cell phones, and folks just didn't have access to the amount of information, right, that we have access today, right? So because of this lack of information, this lack of knowledge, folks were at a disadvantage when it came to entering into these transactions with mineral buyers, right? Because typically the mineral buyers had some superior knowledge, right, that allowed them to identify that tract. And they used that superior knowledge to their advantage in these transactions. So this leads us to an important concept that I'd like to introduce that every mineral owner should be aware of, that I like to call the knowledge arbitrage, right? So the knowledge arbitrage exists where the buyer has superior knowledge, superior information than the seller does, right, about the thing being sold. Now, the knowledge arbitrage doesn't only apply to sales of oil and gas minerals, right? We can find examples of, knowledge arbitrage in our daily lives, right? So a good example of a knowledge arbitrage is when you take your car to the auto mechanic, right? That auto mechanic knows a whole lot more about how that car operates than you do, right? So if you're not careful, you could end up paying for a whole bunch of things that don't need to be replaced, right? So it's merely the concept that, the person who is on the other side of the table from you, right, that you're engaging in this business deal with, right, they understand more than you do about the thing that is the subject of the deal, right? So this concept of the knowledge arbitrage as it applies to minerals, right, it very much existed back in the day, but it still very much exists today. The knowledge arbitrage leads to a couple of unfortunate things. Mainly, it leads to a lack of trust, right, between sellers and buyers, right? Because the seller understands that the buyer knows more than they're letting on, right, about the value of the asset. It just leads to distrust. And it also leads to something that we talked about in the first episode called the never sell mindset. And you'll see a link to the Never Sell Mindset episode up above. So how do you protect yourself from the knowledge arbitrage? Well, there's a couple of things that you can do, right? So what do you do when you go to the auto mechanic, right? If you're not educated, right, about the particular part of your car that's going to be broken, then you just have to take the seller's word for it, right? So education is absolutely critical. The other thing that you can do is get a second opinion, right? And we give second opinions all the time, right? I have folks that reach out to me that say, you know what, I got an offer from such and such mineral group, would you provide me with an evaluation so that I have something to stack this offer up against, right? So that is a very important way to protect against the knowledge arbitrage. Okay, folks, so let's wrap it up. So today we talked about the history of mineral buying and the knowledge arbitrage. We hope you'll join us in part 2 of this series. You should see the link up above, where we're going to talk about the shale revolution and the birth of the professional mineral buyer. If you enjoyed our content today, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is incredibly helpful to us, and it allows us to get this content out to more folks. If you have any questions for us or if we can do anything for you, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on the website, mineralsguide.com. You can also reach me directly by email, Stephen@mineralsguide.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.